So welcome everyone to the PhD Unlimited series, Podcasting the Humanities. So PhD Unlimited is a professional development type workshop for graduate students in the arts and humanities specifically. We really take a broad approach to thinking about career development. So in this series, we've included workshops on, how do you do really thorough research? How do you conduct research in a university library setting? Because we feel like those kinds of research skills would translate beyond to any kind of future career you wanted to explore. So in that same way, we've offered workshops on building professional mentorships, which is the next workshop coming up, meaning that you want to think about your mentorship world as composing more than just one person who's your advisor. So in the May 25th workshop, we're going to focus on building a kind of network of mentors, some of whom are faculty members that will guide you as a grad student, but some of other people that might be staff at the university, they might be your fellow peers, or someone in your program who's just 2 or 3 steps ahead of you can be a wonderful professional mentor. And the idea is to expand that mentorship network that can carry you beyond grad school. So I encourage you to register for that event. You can find us at the DHI website, dhi.ucdavis.edu/PhD Unlimited. But today we are thrilled to have 2 of the 3 recipients of the National Humanities Council's Podcasting the Humanities workshop from last summer talk to us about their experiences there. So the plan for today is I'll give a brief introduction, but then I'm going to turn the event over to our 2 co-presenters who will share more about their experiences. So first, we have Beshara Kehdi, who's a PhD student in cultural studies. Beshara's research focuses on Arab American history and social movements, ethnic studies education and curricula, and writing and rhetoric. He has worked for over 10 years with Arabic and non-Arabic speaking immigrants and refugees in a variety of arts, literacy, and empowerment programs in and out of schools. Beshara has a forthcoming podcast in Arabic called Grandma's Advice, Things You Wish You Had Asked Your Arab Grandma, but Never Did. I love that. And so Beshara is joined by Ashley Teodorson-Taggart, a PhD student in performance studies with the DEs in science and technology studies, feminist theory and research, and studies in performance and practice. Her research interests emerged from a decade-long career as a birth doula. And her current project involves the creation of a weekly podcast where local scholars, birth workers, and policy experts are drawn into contemporary cross-disciplinary dialogue around the state of birth care through pandemic time. So 2 wonderful and different projects. Thank you both for being here. I'm gonna hand the event over to you. And in the meantime, for folks who have joined, please feel free to use the chat for questions. And then in the kind of second portion of the event, you're welcome to unmute or share your video as you like to ask more questions then. So thanks, everyone.
Okay, folks, welcome. I am just trying to share my screen here. And just give me a thumbs up if you can see. Maybe I need to put it into presenter mode. There we go. All right, so thanks so much for being here. This is a small group, but for week 5, I'm super impressed. I feel like every class I've been in, undergrad or grad, folks are riding the low energy wave at this point in the quarter. So we're super excited to see you all and to have a little conversation about our experiences doing podcasting. And so we just wanted to start out with a bit of an icebreaker. So if you don't mind, if you could pop in the chat your year, if you're a graduate student, and what program you're in, if you're a faculty member, maybe your departmental affiliation, and give us an idea of what kinds of podcasts you like listening to today and why. These will be things, I'm not sure that I can see the chat here on my screen now, but these will certainly be things that we can come back to, and as we wrap up our slideshow, it'll give us an idea of how we can answer your questions in particular and where to move the conversation from there. So briefly, I can, and thank you for the introduction, Stephanie. I can share that, as you said, I come from performance studies. The vast majority of my research happens at the intersection of sort of feminist theory and science and technology studies. I'm interested in the relationship between birth and technology, and in particular, since the pandemic, those technologies that mediate our experiences of birth, or give us information about our body. So wearable technologies, video technologies like Zoom, like the Facebook portal, have been objects of study over the course of the last year. And I share that just so you have a sense of what kind of arena that I'm working in. And I would invite Beshara to share also, because his work's very interesting.
Yeah, thanks, Ash. And also thank you, Stephanie and the DHI for letting us present today in this opportunity. I don't really have anything to add in terms of my bio. I'm sure there's other things, but I'm really interested mostly in community. And so how do we incorporate technology, sort of current trends in sort of social media and what is popular in terms of building community, and then also creating new forms of knowledge, I think is really interesting and really important for us. Sort of as we start this conversation, how do we sort of bring the world here at the same time that we're trying to expand the university and the world too, I think are important questions as we sort of start on this journey. I think the last thing, just before I turn it over back to Ash, is we wanted to do a land acknowledgement just as we're sort of jumping into this conversation and speaking of community, and acknowledge that UC Davis is currently occupying the traditional, ancient, and contemporary lands of the Patwin and Mintu peoples. And we recognize and support the active sovereignty of these peoples and the reclamation of their lands as the rightful stewards here. And we also wanted to sort of, in absence, recognize Cinthya, who's not here, who spent hours and hours on this presentation. We only modified it a little bit, Ash and I, and so she really put the work in to sort of provide this space for us all. And so hello, Cinthya, in the ether. She had some family matters she had to take care of. And with that, I will turn it back over to Ash as we sort of jump into this.
Thank you for that, Beshara. And we also, before we close out today's session, I want to know where we can get your forthcoming podcast.
I'll let everyone know at the end.
Sounds great. All righty. Let's see if I can advance my slides here. All right. So intro to podcasting. Again, this is just our basic information. Thank you for mentioning Cinthya, who again put this whole slideshow together, who comes from Native American studies. I'm in performance studies, and Beshara is in cultural studies. This is kind of fun because we all come from slightly different perspectives that are in dialogue, but also have their own sort of canon and approach. So it's been interesting to talk through our process of doing this podcasting project and how each of our different disciplines kind of make sense of this newer sort of mode of sharing. Okay, this seems absolutely appropriate. So it started off as, this is 2019, you have two options, therapy or start your own podcast. And then it became 2020, and now it's 2021, and we might say there are two things you have to do, both therapy and start your own podcast. And this is a funny slide for sure, but it also brings up a conversation that Beshara and I were having actually earlier, which was that in preparation for this workshop that we're doing today with you all, we went back and listened to the podcast that we had developed during the course of this week-long workshop that we did. And we had similar reflections, which is that there's something about this medium in particular, the closeness of the voices, the way storytelling unfolds in the podcast, that really kind of transported us back in time to that, almost a year ago now when we were making these podcasts. At the time, we were something like 2 or 3 months into home quarantine, and there was really a sense of not knowing how long this was going to last, what impacts it was. or would have on our teaching, on our jobs, on our families, and so forth. And so, for me, in looking back, I really am kind of, it's like a little time capsule that takes me right back to the beginning of the pandemic and this sort of set of questions that we were all wrestling with, which, thankfully we were able to kind of take and make sense of in this podcasting workshop. Okay, so one of the primary questions that comes up around podcasting, particularly in academic spaces, has to do with what kinds of, as this suggests, methods of presenting our findings are considered valid and legitimate within the academy. And so, of course, we've all come up, at this point, if we're graduate students or faculty, we've come up with this idea that publishing in journals, maybe edited volumes, books, conference presentations, dissertations, and so forth. These are all sort of legitimized ways of communicating our knowledge and our research. But what's interesting is there's been this move within podcasting, especially again within the humanities and in academic discourse, to really advocate for podcast to be considered a very valid form of putting forward our research. And in some cases, we've seen an interesting shift, and it's different per sort of department, but a shift toward people actually thinking through their dissertation projects and using podcasting as part of that. And, I can say, coming from my discipline in performance studies, there is sort of a fair amount of flexibility in terms of the sort of mode of production that we use and how we are presenting our work. But even so, even in a field that is as kind of broad and open to new approaches, I haven't come across a podcast forward kind of dissertation. So I think there's this interesting move in the humanities to really see podcasting as a valid form of publication, you might say. And that's certainly something that was taken up in great detail in the workshop that we were a part of. So we just want to kind of highlight that this is a current sort of tension that exists within the podcasting world and the academic world, but also something that we think offers a real opportunity for us to be kind of putting forward our work in new and exciting ways. And also ways that are, sort of evolving, especially for those of us who are working in media or working with technology. There's something really compelling about working within the medium. And so podcasting offers us a real opportunity to do that. Okay, so when we're talking about podcasting, in our experience, we're looking at it through a humanities lens. And so when we're approaching it from this position, we want to think about a number of different things. We want to think about what kind of story it is that we want to tell, the history around that story. We might utilize things like testimony or various artifacts. So these could be, as we note here, textual, musical, sound, visual, and so forth. We're thinking about the way that we use captured and found sound, conversation, interviews, and field recordings. And what's pretty fun about podcasting is that it doesn't require a particular fidelity to any one of these facets, but it really allows this sort of an invitation to play with the different sounds, to play with the transition, to play with the voice, to play with this sort of narrative mode. In our group, we found there were really interesting ways that people were using, I love this idea of the found and captured sound. So there was sort of like a sense in which we could bring in the idea of the hustle and bustle of a home in quarantine, for example, by recording, sort of what we could now consider, certainly through the anthropological lens, field recordings of kids getting ready for school in the morning, pouring their cereal, and these sort of ambient kind of sounds really added a new layer to our podcast. It wasn't even just that we were telling a story, but there was some sort of immersive quality for us. So these are some things to keep in mind if you are interested in podcasting in humanities. We are going to pause here for a quick moment. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, I think, and Beshara is going to share. We had this kind of idea that, it's really easy for us to talk at you for an hour, but that's not very exciting or fun. And we really are, especially since it's a relatively small group, interested in responding to where you're at in terms of your relationship to podcasting and your interest in it. So we're going to want to propose a couple of prompts and utilize this very cool feature called a Jamboard. I will stop sharing so that Beshara can take over because he's sort of like the wizard of the Jamboard.
Thanks, Ash. All right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to put into the chat a link to a Jamboard. And I'm going to share my screen just briefly. So if everyone try to jump on, everyone should have access to this unique feature of Google Jamboards. And when I see everyone in the room, I will start. And so let me just share my screen really quickly. Okay, so we wanted to just gather some more information and see what folks are thinking of. And so just in the next couple minutes, we want you to answer these questions. So what kind of podcast do you want to make? Or if you haven't quite thought of it, like, might you want to make? Are you thinking of would be fun to make? And what kind of content would you include in there? So what would the podcast actually be made of? What would it sound like? And I want you to just take a couple minutes and think of that. To add a box, if you just sort of hover over the arrow just to the bottom, there's a little sticky note function. And if you want to add on here anything, you just sort of add it and then you click save. So if you wanted to write about muffins, muffins will be your podcast, that'll pop up there. And so do that for the next couple minutes, and then I will sort of give you a cue to move on, to click on the arrow on top to move on to the next question. So what makes a good podcast? So this is just more of sort of free flowing ideas. What brings you to this workshop? What kinds of podcasts are you already thinking about in your head? And in about a minute and a half, I will sort of give a cue to sort of move on. And in the meantime, I will play some music, soothing music in the background. Can you hear that?
I guess you wonder where I've been. I searched to find the love within. I came back to let you know. Got a thing for you, and I can't let go. My friends wonder what is wrong with me.
And if you added yours, feel free to just go on to the screen and answer the next question.
I came back to let you know. Got a thing for you, and I can't let go. Some people go down the wall, and they may never mind what they dream of. What you won't do to do for love. You tried everything, but you don't give up. In my world, only you make me do for love.
Spend about 30 more seconds.
My friends wonder what is wrong with me, but I'm in a daze from your love, you see. I came back to let you know. Got a thing for you, and I can't let go.
All right, so I'm going to stop my share one last time. I'm just going to read some of these out, just sort of in the last couple minutes. If you're still writing or you're still thinking, that's fine. We can always revisit them. But we have on here so far, I want to make a podcast about social science genomics, highlighting research that refutes determinist claims about the effects of DNA on socioeconomic outcomes. It would feature interviews with researchers in this area. I love that. Sticking it back, I like. Would love to expand my current podcast on music and nature in the form of interviews with artists. A good podcast is engaging, interesting, creative, and says something. Yes, I love that. and a podcast on public humanities, public engaged research from the university that features interviews with researchers and their community collaborators. I love this. These are all like a really amazing podcast ideas. And it looks like one of you already has one. That's awesome. For the next page, we have what makes a good podcast. Coherent stories, episodes that come out on a regular and predictable basis. Engaging hosts, great storytelling, not overly produced for my taste, something that feels spontaneous, unique to that moment. I love that. These are all excellent points on what would keep you actually listening to a podcast, or what is it that actually draws you to it. And so just like a couple more ideas, just sort of piggybacking on what you all had said. There's like a diversity of subject matter that I'm already seeing in some of these responses. Multiple voices, this seems like that's important, is to bring in multiple voices. To intercut commentary with interviews is also something else that like can help with the flow. Teaching each other, it's almost like you're teaching others sort of about your research, about what you know. There's a balance between maybe conversation and scripted questions. So maybe like, how do we navigate this, the style of this conversation? Well-researched. I mean, some of you like already are showing like that this is part of your research. Is this communicating? And then it's good storytelling. Some of you already said really good storytelling and narrative, and that there's sort of an arc, there's sort of a way that brings you in and continues. Good music, flow, audience, sound bites, and lastly, my favorite, that your audience isn't bored, that they're always being engaged. I think are all really, really great points that you all brought up. So I'll turn it back to Ash.
All right, thank you. I love seeing where everyone's kind of coming from. And, as I was looking through the chat from folks' introductions, I'm realizing that we really have a cool group of folks here who are coming from all different kind of wings of campus. So welcome to all of you. One of the things that I found really compelling about podcasting is the way in which we can kind of stitch together conversations from a number of different kind of sources and so forth, and then mix it with that sort of creative piece around music and the fade-ins and the fade-outs and the flow of the podcast. So very excited that you all are here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the nuts and bolts of what it looks like to actually make a podcast. The first step is obviously what we've already talked about, which is having an idea, kind of understanding what it is that appeals to you about podcasting and so forth. But there are some sort of technical requirements that can make your podcasting experience a lot smoother. So we're going to start off with the basic equipment that you will need to start a podcast. Now, it's worth saying that we were super fortunate because part of our experience doing this podcasting workshop was that we were provided with a fair amount of the equipment that we needed to produce our podcasts. And so we're going to go into that right now. It's worth noting that, you can really pull together a podcast using all kinds of equipment, much of which you already will have at home. So there are ways to kind of make the quality of sound a little bit better, to kind of eliminate some of the background noise around you, and so forth. But really, especially, if you've got a phone, a smartphone, you pretty much have everything you need right there on that little handheld device to create a pretty cool podcast. So certainly don't let any of this sort of equipment conversation dissuade you from moving forward with your podcasting. These are just some sort of suggestions about things that we found helpful, and equipment that really seemed to kind of bring our podcast to the next level. So you're obviously going to need a device that you can record audio on. As we state here, you can use any voice recorder, including your computer or your iPhone. The vast majority of computers these days have really pretty good quality microphones built into them and speakers so that you can hear it back. So what we have here is just one example of a recorder. This one, I'm not sure where this falls in the price range, but generally speaking, you're looking at like a $100 to $300 investment for a really good quality one. Again, that's not obligatory. You can use a lot of what you have, and there even can be some sort of, meaningful addition to your podcast. If you're using less high-tech equipment, you can pick up some of that more ambient sound, which certainly has its place as well. in podcasting. So this is sort of the magic trio that we used when we were creating our podcasts. If you see on what is the left of my screen, the Yeti blue podcasting mic, this is what we use, the exact same one. So what I really liked about this microphone was that it allows for that sort of closeness of voice that is kind of I don't know if I would say standard, but is very common in podcasting. And it really sort of makes the audio sound right like it's in your ear, almost like you're sitting and having a conversation with someone. In the middle, you'll see this relatively inexpensive pop filter. That's something that will screw onto one of the legs of this microphone, and it will come in between the microphone and your mouth. And it kind of will take out some of those hard T sounds, some of those harsher sounds that come out of the mouth and so forth, so that it kind of smooths the podcast, so you don't have any of these sharp moments unless you want to. And then third, we have a set of headphones. These are relatively basic. These ones are about $15. Some folks have had better luck using noise canceling headphones. The one thing that you may want to pay attention to if you're getting this particular setup is that you have the proper sort of adapter on the end of your headphones. That really makes a big difference. But again, these are just suggestions. You can use all kinds of things. I will say, when I was recording my podcast for this, it was an interview. A portion of it was an interview between myself and my partner, who's a therapist, and we only had one of these pop filters. So what we did was we set up the microphone on a little cart in between the two of us, like we were sitting across a table, and I had the pop filter on my side, and on his side, we sort of took a wire hanger, and we put a piece of sort of mesh lace fabric over it, and then we just sort of screwed it onto his side. So his pop filter was a homemade situation. So, you can get really creative, and there are certainly ways to work around the financial investment. Okay, this is a really cool setup. So what you'll see here is, we talked about the microphone being set up in the center there, the pop filter coming between your mouth and the microphone. You can see the headphones up to the right there. And you'll notice this sort of curving spike wall thing that you see there. That's really a cool little piece of equipment, and it's meant to sort of make your space have less ambient noise in it, right? So it's like if you were going into a recording studio, you might have that sort of filter there. Okay, now you may be asking yourself, especially if you're a student like us, how is it that you are going to be able to get support for your podcasting project? And so we wanted to highlight a number of opportunities on campus that are available in some cases to undergraduates and graduate students, and in some cases also to faculty and staff. So just quickly highlighting the Feminist Research Institute, their seed grants. They are, I believe it's set up, yes, that a number of students can work with a faculty mentor. Really cool organization. I've had the great luck to work with the FRI over the course of a number of years, and I just couldn't say more about them. Also, the WRRC, they have a number of really incredible scholarships that are available to undergraduates and graduate students. Some of them have to do with the arts, some have to do with research, some have to do with financial need. They also have a really cool collaboration and co-sponsorship program. I'm not sure where it stands right now with the pandemic, but in the past it's been an online form that you can fill out like a Google form, and you really can outline what program or project you're working on and where it is that you'd like the support, whether that's financial support or staff advisor, supplies, materials, and so forth. WRC is an awesome resource on campus, and it's worth saying not just for the financial piece, but they also do a lot of incredible work around crisis support and resource referral. The Davis Humanities Institute, which is why we're all here, really cool group, and I could say as a graduate student I've really received a fair amount of support from the DHI, and certainly is what has enabled us to move forward with our podcasting. Also worth noting, the Mellon Public Scholar Program. Very exciting. Looks like Stephanie is the head of that project, so that's very, very much worth looking into if you are doing projects that relate to the sort of social. Also, the Native Cultures Fund, Lindsay Bear would be the contact for that. Cal Humanities, and then you're going to see a number of other kind of links for different grant opportunities. All right, and here we're going to kind of shift gears a tiny bit away from funding and campus support. And it's also worth noting that I think that we both agree that we're happy to answer questions for anyone definitely within the session, but also if you have any questions as a follow-up, we're happy to provide our email addresses so that you can reach out to us directly. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Beshara, who's going to pick up on this section.
Awesome. Thank you, Ash, for laying that out. So I'm going to share my screen also and just sort of continue on where Ash left us. Can everyone see the slides? Oh, awesome. Okay. Perfect. All right. So just some things about tech. So you're starting, you're like, okay, how do I actually record? What do I do? How do I make audio? How do I do all of this stuff? So there's a million options, to be honest, with the audio software. There's Audacity and Adobe Audition are two of sort of the most well-known. I personally use Audacity. It's free and it's very powerful. And there's 1.5 million different plugins and options that you can use to maneuver audio and sound effects and all that stuff. But I think it's a really great place to start also if you are wanting to sort of jump into it. Adobe Audition, it's paid. And many of the other ones, sort of the higher you go, are paid, but you can also find other free ones. Free audio editor, Ocean Audio, GarageBand on Mac, Audio Hijack, audio editing tools for PC, Waveosaur. There's really a million different options, and depending on your comfort and what you want to try, the world is your oyster in terms of software. The best place is to just start and pick one and kind of see. And there's a lot of really great videos for how to get started with this stuff. And then let's say you have your recording, but the audio sounds great, but you want to add sound. You have to remember that if this is going to be a public podcast and not just maybe something for class or something that's not going to be shared openly, that is going to be shared openly, sorry, that you have to be aware of copyright issues and trademarks and royalty music and what things you will have to end up paying for if you want to sell or make money off of your podcast. And so it's more about what you want your podcast, what the function is for you, if this is going to be something that you want to make a living off of, or if this is just also going to be something that you want just more sort of available publicly. But there are lots of free sites. There's lots of sites to get free music, but free music doesn't also mean that you don't have to pay royalties. And so you have to kind of look and see sort of within the Creative Commons sphere, there's divisions of what kinds of music you can use that are royalty free, that are available for podcasts. Not all royalty free you can use for podcasts, but you can use them for videos. And so you kind of have to jump into all of that. Creative Commons has a really great website that you can go into and see what do all of the different designations of availability mean for the music. Internet Archive is one really great place. They have a ton of different music. Grab Audio, Video Converter. You can like rip music from songs and do lots of different things, rip music from videos, but you just have to be aware of some of these copyright issues. And just a tip is to search for royalty-free, pod-safe music. That's what I was taught to look for. That's one great way of sort of trying to find the right music for you that you can use for your podcast. And then if you decide to also monetize it, then that's a great way so you don't have to deal with legal issues later on. Or you can also make your own music. And there's actually a lot of really interesting websites to make your own beats and do all of that to have in the background. And there's also, I learned last year that there's also people in the library where you can talk to about copyright issues and around music and around videos and all that stuff. And so like, if you are actually unsure about some of the legal issues, connecting with those folks is also another great idea. In the time of Corona, collaborating on podcasts remotely. So there's also really great ways of having conversations with people and recording them that aren't just Zoom, but you can also do this through Skype. Clean Feed is a really interesting website where you can basically have a conversations with almost an unlimited number of people and record the audio, and it's really great quality. Zencaster, and then we have other options. And then also just coordinating. Slack is a really great place if you're trying to coordinate how groups and sort of deal with the details of all of this stuff. The devil's always in the details for a wider sort of communication. Everything the light touches can be transformed into a podcast, says Mufasa. But what's the shadowy place over there? The university where humans choose to write dissertations instead of making podcasts. And if you see the horror, the absolute horror in Simba's face, it's just unimaginable. And so why would they do this? Why would they do this? I as a graduate student still don't know why we do this. All right, moving on. Okay, putting it out there. So let's say you have your podcast, an MP3 file, and you're like, what do I do with this now? It sounds great. How do I get it out into the world? So there's multiple options. So there's two key terms to just be aware of. There's podcasting hosting platforms, and then there's podcast directories. So the podcast hosting platforms are those that will host the file. So these are your podcast file warehouse, if you wish. That's going to be where your podcast is sort of stationed at. And like now that podcasts have sort of grown to the exponential number that they are, there's a lot of really, really great websites that make the process actually really, really easy. Buzzsprout, Podbean, Spreaker, Podiant, Anchor, Stitcher, Zencast. I know people that have posted they've uploaded their files to Podbean and Anchor, for example. And what these sites do, it's sort of like a website. It's like a website with, you get your own sort of page on this website, and it then connects to the podcast directories through an RSS feed, which is sort of like just a link. It's sort of what connects your podcast to these directories, like Apple, iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud. Those places are like aggregators. So they just kind of compile all of these RSS feeds and make them available publicly. And so, the podcast hosting platforms are really great because there's not that much labor for you to do. You upload the file onto the website. The first time you upload your episode, it might take maybe a couple hours to maybe a week. But then after you upload like further episodes, it takes maybe just a couple hours. And so then it sort of automatically updates to these podcast directories. Ryan asks, did you say the platforms automatically connect it to the directory? Yeah, so you can either do it manually from the podcasting hosting platform and sort of you attaching your RSS feed to the different podcast directories, or they can do it automatically. It's up to you. And so you'll just sort of get the RSS feed. You have to make accounts with all of these other places, Apple, Spotify, Google Play, all that stuff, just so that you have your own kind of presence there and you can monitor it. But the posting platforms are nice because they also have unique features where you can like see the data of what, how many people are viewing, all that stuff. I mean, you can also put it on your own website. And so this is another, if you like have the capacity to build your own website, there's like through WordPress, through Wix, through some of these other places, that can be your hosting platform. You can also then connect it to these podcast directories. That's what I will personally be doing when mine comes out, just because I like the control, but it's also a lot of time. And if you want to also sell things like merchandise, like maybe your podcast is part of a larger venture, then you also have to think about, okay, what are the kinds of hosting platforms that can accommodate that kind of stuff. Other places to distribute, you can talk to like local media. So like KPFA in Berkeley, even like Davis here, the sort of local nonprofit radio is a really great place. They love spreading local work that people are doing. KDVS, lots of really great stuff. Cap Radio is in Sacramento, is another one. YouTube, Facebook are great. I mean, you might as well sort of use the cross-platform work if you can do it on Instagram too. That it's sort of like how to like assemble with all of the social media that we know to sort of create your own. I hate to say brand, but that's kind of like it's your own sort of profile, your own like social profile. And then of course the Digital Humanities Center. They have a lot of really great resources. Both like podcasts, but also they'll have like lesson plans. They have lots of really great digital media on there. And they would love to host whatever it is that you're working on and make it available to other people. Davis Media Access, yeah, awesome. They're really great. They really love projects like this. If there's videos, if there's podcasting, they're great. They're community and they want to support the community. All right, so just sort of reiterating what Ash started talking about earlier in terms of digital humanities, that it describes efforts to study digital technologies and culture, employ computational practices in research and teaching, and reflect upon the impact of the digital. So it's not really just about the technology though, it's about human connection and making sort of this work accessible to wider audiences. Really also digital humanities envisions the process of bridging humanistic scholarship with digital environments as a conduit for renewal and transformation of knowledge. It's the production of practices and pedagogical approaches at higher education institutions. And so this is like new practices. So this is also like rethinking about what does it mean to do community-oriented scholarship, right? In the university, we have this idea that we are the experts who go to community and we study community, right? This is kind of the positioning that we are put in. And so digital humanities is also trying to rethink our approach to what it is that we do. That maybe we're not actually here to be speaking for everyone else, but how do we actually include our collaborators, our co-conspirators, our peers, our mentors, the people that we're in relationship to in our research, and allow spaces for them to speak and be heard is important. And so it's also a rethinking of how we think about research and critical pedagogy and scholarship in an equitable manner. And so thank you, David Tenorio, who a couple years ago gave a workshop on digital humanities too. Before I jump to this slide to Hannah McGregor, I wanted to pause for a second and sort of go back and pause for a second, where in a way what we're saying is like, be creative. And yet that's also what I'm not saying. Like what we're not saying is that, okay, now, graduate PhD students who are already feeling like you're overworked and underpaid and are already within this sort of environment that now you're supposed to be creative and do all of this digital humanities stuff on top of it. isn't really what we're saying. What we're saying is to do this work, you have to do it because this is what drives you, because this is like that doing sort of traditional forms of scholarship does not fit with your ethics or your values or your how you want to approach university-oriented work, research. That it really has to come from a different place. And that if that is what you want to do, that there is a scholarly literature that can support it. And that's in no matter what discipline you are in the university, that their digital humanities is there to support whatever it is, the kind of work that you want to do, to justify it to your advisors, to whoever here, because it's meaningful. And even if it is sort of an alternative, then maybe people consider it an alternative, that it's actually, it derives from a very different ethics, I think, and how we perceive our work and the importance of our work in community. And so Hannah McGregor is an assistant professor in publishing at Simon Fraser University in Canada, where her research and teaching focuses on the links between publishing and social change, and from the role that podcasts might play in expanding public engagement with research, to systemic barriers to access in the academic publishing environment. So she also is an assistant host and producer of Secret Feminist Agenda. And she's doing really, really groundbreaking work to ensure that non-traditional scholarly options like podcasting are taken seriously and are valued and compensated in the university as other forms of academic production. And so she's someone to sort of like really research, keep an eye out for the kinds of work that she's doing. Really, she's sort of a like path breaking for a lot of folks that want to do this work. And she's also creating like a peer review process for podcasts. So like that within sort of the rubric of the university, that this work is still valued and recognized for the like the quality and the caliber that it is. So yeah, we have just one last slide. Oh, tell me more about how you have a great face for podcasting. I mean, Willy Wonka, he's just so snarky. It's just like, and yet is the most perfect way of ending this this talk. And so with that, I will stop my screen, and then Ash and I will just sort of open it up to you all if you all have any questions or thoughts or anything about what we've talked about, anything it brought up for you all. We're happy to talk for the next 10 minutes. And again, thank you, Ash. Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, so feel free to unmute yourselves, type in the chat. You know, we're happy to have a conversation.